Monday afternoon to you. It's 4 o'clock time for Sports for CLE. Hope you had a great weekend. Thanks for joining us. Some Browns talk in a little bit, but the Cavs dominating the news today. They are getting set to name Kenny Atkinson their new head coach. Wednesday will be the draft. We expect a Donovan Mitchell extension as well. So Atkinson was the head coach of the Brooklyn Nets from 2016 to 2020. His record, one great, 118-90. Now, it was a full rebuild during his time with the Nets, and he did get him to the playoffs in that third year before he got fired in his fourth year. Last 3 years, he's been an assistant on Steve Kerr's staff with Golden State Warriors. Tim Doyle from CBS Sports HQ on if Kenny Atkinson is the right coach for the Cavs at this time.
Kenny Atkinson seems to be a perfect fit. Guy got D'Angelo Russell to be an all-star. It's up to Karis LeVert and Jared Allen to keep Donovan Mitchell there. If they keep Donovan Mitchell there, they're not that far away. They go grab one key free agent. They're not that far away from competing to go in the NBA Finals. Kenny's a very well-respected mind, and obviously, Steve Kerr's won multiple championships. He's considered one of the greatest NBA coaches of all time, and he had Kenny Atkinson sitting by him side by side over the last couple of years. So I think Kenny's a great basketball mind. When he got to Brooklyn, it was a disaster. He gets them into the playoffs. They bring Kyrie in. Kyrie doesn't like him. He's fired. So that's the NBA.
With that, let's welcome in Sam Amico from hoopswire.com. So, Sam, who is Kenny Atkinson, and what kind of coach are the Cavs getting set to hire?
Yeah, he's a veteran coach, obviously, 56 years old, not a super young guy, but has had a lot of different experiences, as we heard just there, not only the coach of the Nets for a while, but also was with Doc Rivers for a year with the Clippers, and then went on to Steve Kerr with the Warriors. And, just a guy who's been around and been around the league, and people know who he is. And I think that's who the Cavs wanted, was a guy who, had some experience not only as a head coach, but had been in winning situations, obviously in a winning situation with the Warriors there for a while. So, and he's kind of been looking for the right position. Was offered the Hornets job a few years ago, accepted the job, and then turned it away. So, I think that he just felt at that time it wasn't the right job. And, now with the Cavs feeling confident that Donovan Mitchell's going to be back, obviously I think Kenny Atkinson thought, yeah, this is finally the place for me, the job for me. And, he's just a veteran coach who's really been kind of respected for his offensive mindset, particularly getting those Nets into the playoffs, which that year they were really undermanned, and people thought that he did a very nice job getting them into the playoffs. And, of course, was the last coach fired before the league shut down because of COVID.
So he is an offensive mind, and the thought is he can find a way to make this offense work. Looks like you have pieces. You got to make them fit together.
That's just it. Who's going to get Evan Mobley to the next level? That was a big part of the interview process that the Cavs wanted to know. How are you going to help develop Evan Mobley? What's your plan? If you get this job, what are you going to do to help him rise to the next level? How are you going to make all these guys fit? There's some questions about fits with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell. Maybe Garland gets traded. Maybe he does. But if he doesn't, how does this all work? And that's things that they went over in the coaching interviews. And Kenny Atkinson came up with probably the best answers. And look, we saw what happened with Mike Brown after his time with Golden State, right? Mike Brown used to tell me all the time when he coached the Cavs, the uglier the game, the better. Well, now Mike Brown went to Steve Kerr, learned some things, grew as a coach there. And now the Sacramento Kings under Mike Brown are one of the top offensive teams in the entire NBA. The Cavs have been really good defensively. We're always very good defensively under J.B. Bickerstaff. There were some questions about their offensive flow. That's where Kenny Atkinson brings to the table. Is he's had some time under Steve Kerr learning that system. Can he apply that to the Cavaliers? That's what we're about to find out.
All right, so same guy from CBS Sports HQ, Tim Doyle, on if Kenny Atkinson, if he thinks he makes Donovan Mitchell want to stay here.
Yes, because how deep is Kenny Atkinson's relationships with two other key Cleveland Cavalier players? Let's go back to Kenny Atkinson when he was on the Brooklyn Nets. Who did he draft? Jared Allen? Yeah, he did. Karis LeVert? Yeah, he did. Do those two guys really like him? I'm sure they do. They wouldn't have hired Kenny Atkinson. Both those guys were like, oh, God, we can't stand him. So he believed in those two guys. So now it becomes Karis LeVert's job, Jared Allen's job, to keep Donovan Mitchell here. Oh, by the way, D'Angelo Russell, the often criticized left-hander for the Los Angeles Lakers, made an all-star team one year. Guess who his coach was? Kenny Atkinson. And I think Donovan Mitchell legit needs to be in the MVP conversation for what he has done with Cleveland since he has gone there. He has elevated them to one of the top 5 or 6 teams in the Eastern Conference. So, you know, if you're like a ring chaser right now, and that's why I brought up Draymond Green, because that's probably where he is at this point in his career. He's made a ton of money. It's about winning. This is a roster that's pretty good. Now you got to move to Cleveland, which isn't as fun as Los Angeles or Miami. But Kenny Atkinson seems to be a perfect fit.
Sam, we'll get into some of the names he was bantying about with Draymond Green, but is he the right coach at this point in time? I don't know.
Yeah, that's always hard to tell, you know, until you see what what the offense looks like under him. You know, it's one thing to win the press conference, and this is not a big press conference winner. You know, this isn't a big splashy hire, but that's okay. You know, the Cavs have made splashy hires in the past. David Blatt, John Bielik, that didn't really work out. So, you know, it's not about winning the press conference. It's about how this guy relates to the players. And I think that's the one positive that we really know is this guy's been an NBA head coach before. There are guys on the Cavs who played for him before, in Jared Allen and Karis LeVert, who are fans of his. So I think that's a big, you know, element to all of this, is that you are hiring a guy who some of the players know and like. This is a hire, again, Donovan Mitchell signed off on this, knew about it, was not involved in the search, but, you know, knew about Kenny Atkinson and James Borrego, one of the other finalists, said, yeah, whatever you guys decide, I like both of them. So, you know, I think that's, in that sense, yeah, he's the man. You know, I mean, they didn't hire somebody their players don't like, and that's really what you want to avoid. So I think under this circumstance, he's your guy.
So the reports are that Cavs are getting close to that extension with Donovan Mitchell. It can be a 4-year extension that would give him 5 more years. It can go up to like $209 million. What are you hearing about that? How many years do you think it will be, and how close are they?
Yeah, that's just it. It's exactly, you know, the numbers that you just listed. 4 years, $209 million, just about. And I'm hearing that the last year of that could potentially be a player option, which would be, so he signed through next season, Donovan Mitchell, and then the contract would go 4 years after that. So that'd give the Cavs 5 more years of control when it comes to, you know, what to do with Donovan Mitchell, their star player. And if he signs that extension, you're going to presume he knows he's here for another 4 years, at maybe 5. That 5th year could potentially be a player option on that contract. But they're close. You know, it's not hard for somebody to say, here's the maximum we can offer you. We can't offer you anything else. And then for him to say, well, yes, it doesn't take long for that to happen. What they may be saying or dealing with now is kind of that player option, whereas he's probably saying, look, we want that player option. The Cavs are probably saying, yeah, that's fine. Let us get the language in there to make it official. So I think that they're going to be close, and then it can become, or they are close, very close right now. And then I think it will become official, you know, the very first minute it can in early July, which I guess is next week.
Yeah, we're knocking on the door. Heck, the draft, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, is Wednesday. Assuming they get that deal done, gut feeling, what happens with Darius Garland? Just your gut feeling. You're closer to it than I am, and I have my thoughts.
My gut feeling is that his camp does request the trade. I think where there's smoke, there's fire there. And maybe they're curious about fit. I think that the Cavs probably were going to look to trade Darius Garland even without that. And I know that we're all hearing and what they're, putting out, the word that they're putting out is we want to run it back, which I think there are worse things to do than run it back. I mean, Darius Garland was an all-star a few years ago. You're hopeful that he can rediscover that. But if his camp isn't, on board with that, then then I think you move on and you find a better fit. And that's something that you're going to probably take all summer to do if that's the case. So I think it's 50-50, but I would not be the least bit that Garland returns. I think it's 50-50, but I would not be the least bit surprised if they were to, both sides were willing and ready to move on, and that happens. And the Cavs should get some nice pieces back if that's the case.
And the Cavs have to say we want to run it back. The minute they say, yeah, we're looking to trade Darius Garland, his trade value takes a pretty significant hit. So they're, in spite of what they say, my gut feeling is they're probably trying to find a way to keep him happy and add pieces that make more sense potentially. All right, before we go to break, Tim Doyle one more time. This one's really interesting. He's just throwing a bunch of stuff out there about where the Cavs roster goes from here.
Way the dominoes may fall out in San Francisco if Clay moves on, if they start trending in the wrong direction, and let's just say that thing gets blown up. Draymond Green has Midwest ties. The Cleveland Cavaliers, if they retain Donovan Mitchell, they're young, they're talented, they're heading in this direction, okay? Not in this direction. So obviously the relationship Kenny could have with Draymond Green. But I think the bigger thing is, Zach, the LA Lakers draft number 17 in the NBA draft. Cleveland drafts number 20. Do they go out there and take Bronny James at number 20? Because then if you grab Bronny, maybe the King wants to come on home and then he leaves his boy JJ out in LA. Oh, so many storylines. The NBA sometimes, Zach, is juicier off the court than it actually is on the court.
Sam, Draymond Green's one thing. I can't see Bronny James and LeBron coming back. Draymond Green, that might happen.
I think that either one's a long shot. I could see maybe a Klay Thompson if you can, if he's not getting the deal that he wants, that's a potential type deal, which nobody would be excited about that in 2024. I'm sorry to say, but if you're looking for a veteran shooter off the bench, you could do worse, especially if you could get him for cheap. But I think that the Cavs could go another cheaper route. They're probably, they've got to figure out what's going to happen with Darius Garland before they can decide on anything else in the offseason. This is assuming Donovan Mitchell signs that contract extension. Then your next order of business is obviously the draft, then figuring out, what do we do with Darius Garland? You may know that Wednesday night. You may have it figured out by the draft on Wednesday night what you're going to do with Darius Garland, and could he potentially be moved? The draft is a big time to trade people, so I think that's something to keep an eye out on. I'd be surprised, but it's something to watch.
Sam Amico from hoopswire.com and I can step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll talk a little bit more about the draft. Sports for CLE. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Moneymaker from the Ohio Lottery has no interest in beating around the bush. Money Maker. You play the game, you could win money. Up to $2 million. With more than $88 million in prizes from $50 to $500. Moneymaker cuts right to the cash. Unlike this guy.
We continue talking Cavs with Sam Amico from hoopswire.com. First round of the NBA draft is Wednesday, barring a trade. The Cavs will make their first pick at number 20 in the first round. Here are some of the players that mock drafts have tied to the Cavs. We're going to start out with Carlton Carrington. He is a point guard, shooting guard combo. Not quite 19 years old just yet. From Pittsburgh, you see the athleticism, the size, the defense, the scores of all of the intangibles or tangibles, if you will, on the right-hand side. Then NBA comparison, Sean Livingston, Spencer Dinwiddie. Sam, I think this is kind of what you were alluding to before the draft. If they go out and they draft a point guard pretty high in this draft, that might be an indication that they're looking to move on potentially from Darius Garland.
Yeah, that could be one sign. I think our mock draft, which I did a couple weeks ago, has them taking Carrington. So, yeah, that's I think he's a nice player in the sense that that's somebody who's projected to go in the 18 to 30 range. This draft is so wide open and such a crapshoot. But he plays both guard spots. Obviously, probably a little bit of a project, as would anybody be that you get at 20. So I think that's one thing you're looking at. I think they're going to look at big guys too to develop. I'd be surprised if we see Tristan Thompson back or Damian Jones. I think those guys are gone. So you're going to need some help up front. One way to do that is to get guys to develop and maybe win, guys who are ready to help right away. If you can find them, maybe like guys who were seniors in college this past year. But you've got Craig Porter Jr. coming along. This is assuming you trade Darius Garland. And if you do trade Darius Garland, I'll tell you what, guys, they're going to get back a point guard in that deal. They're not going to just trade him away and not fill that position. Because as nice as Craig Porter Jr. is, he's not ready to run the team yet. So I think that there's a few possibilities that could come out of this draft. They have to draft somebody, but after they draft somebody, they could trade that player as well.
So another guy that has been tied to the Cavs in some mock drafts this is an interesting one. Johnny Furphy, shooting guard, small forward. Again, he's 19 and a half, so under 20. NBA comp, Sam Decker, Gordon Hayward. Plays for Kansas, is from Australia, of all places, Melbourne, Australia. When I've seen, for whatever reason, Sam, I saw the Kansas Jayhawks play, and I like that kid. That kid can make threes. He's kind of scrappy. He's an irritating defender. And
yeah.
I could see if he's there at 20, I'd be all in on them grabbing him. I think he's probably going to go a little bit before them.
Yeah, he's projected probably to fall right outside the lottery, right after 14 or 15. But for the reasons you explained, Dave, he's a good outside shooter. He's scrappy, kind of got that Matthew Dellavedova Australian edge to his game, and really has an endless motor. So, somebody like that is kind of who they wouldn't mind taking is a wing player who can shoot and rebound and gets after it. So that's certainly the two players that we've listed and talked about so far are guys who might be fits.
So another guy that some mock drafts have him going is guard from USC, not named Bronny James, Isaiah Collier, under 20. You see again, if you look at the strength, the quickness, all that stuff is in that chart over to the right-hand side of it. NBA comp, Jeff Teague and Eric Bledsoe. So that's intriguing. I mean, if you're telling me you can get an Eric Bledsoe, Jeff Teague kind of guard at 20, yeah, all right, I'd be in for that.
Yeah, he's we saw he has pretty good size for a point guard, 6'4", stronger guy. Already ready, even though he's 18 years old, 18 and 19, barely 19, already has NBA ball handling and passing skills. So that's a guy who can set up people. Not a great outside shooter, not bad, but definitely the best player at USC this past season. Even though we hear the name Bronny James, this was their best guard. And Isaiah Collier had a great reputation going to USC. And upside, sky's the limit, and maybe at 20, that's what you're looking for is a guy to develop and can come in and he can play both backcourt spots too. So if you're playing Craig Porter Jr., Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, any of those guys, Collier could fit in there as well. It kind of reminds me of a shorter version of Karis LeVert, not lengthy like that, but can do, all the little intangibles and kind of an X factor type of guy.
Last guy we'll take a look at, potential pick at 20 overall, Jacoby Walter, shooting guard from Baylor, just under 20, NBA comp, Reggie Bullock. And again, you see all of the athleticism and all those scores add up to a 90 overall. That some of them put him at the 12th best player, 13th in the mock. There are a couple of them that have Walter mocked to the Cavs at number 20. Again, those are the kind of guys you're looking at number 20.
Yeah, and he's a nice player. I mean, guys who play at Baylor are real physical, and for a shooting guard, very physical. I find that Reggie Bullock comparison pretty accurate. But kind of, and Jay Crowder, that type of guy who's going to be a physical player at shooting guard on the wing, would be a nice fit. Look out. I'm going to tell you too, Dave. Watch out for Enrique Freeman from Akron. He did not work out with the Cavs, but he is really climbing the draft charts. Wonderful kid from Cleveland. He said that the Cavs have been watching him all season and following him closely. So Enrique would be thrilled, obviously, to go to 20. He's probably projected at 20, 25, but he loves the Cavs, and he did work out for him last year, or spent some time, and they've been following him closely. Obviously, local kid. He's 6'7", plays kind of that shooting forward type role, but it can be a physical player too. Been compared to Draymond Green, who was drafted number 35. So who knows? I mean, maybe an Enrique Freeman is a guy who could rise up to number 20. And I know the Cavs do like him. But they're looking for those type of players. Anybody who can fill that kind of wing shooting role while being also physical, because they're going to need some help underneath the basket with some of these bench players moving on, veteran bench players moving on.
Yeah, it's a guy that's 6'7", runs the floor well, can jump. Needs to work on. If he is able to hit a 17, 18-foot jumper, he's probably a lottery pick. If he was a little more consistent with his outside shot, double-double. Kid that was a walk-on, went from walk-on to MAC Player of the Year. So work ethics there. Before I let you go, some names you think that the Cavs could be looking at as potential free agent trade targets that would make sense now that we know it's Kenny Atkinson.
Yeah, free agency is going to be tough because you don't have a whole lot of money to spend. You're going to, you'll have the money that Tristan Thompson and Damian Jones and some of those other minimum contracts are for, but you're going to be able to find some, if you're trading Darius Garland, then all of a sudden, you're creating trade exceptions, you hope, and bringing back bigger names, right? Obviously we've heard the name Brandon Ingram from the Pelicans, who's widely supposed to be available. San Antonio, I've been told repeatedly, would really pursue Darius Garland if he becomes available. And I think those are the two teams that you'd really have to keep an eye on, are New Orleans and San Antonio. San Antonio obviously wanting to, a decent point guard because you got Victor Wembanyama there, and you want to get, start winning some games there. So I think that those would be the two teams to keep an eye on. I don't know what San Antonio would give you back. Darius Garland, Brandon Ingram, those salaries match. I think that if you're going to trade Garland, probably, somebody like a Brandon Ingram would be probably the high that you're going to get, especially because Darius just didn't have a great season last year. So the numbers, or the return probably isn't going to be that great. Free agency is tough to predict just because you don't know. First of all, you've got to take care of Donovan Mitchell, right? You've got to figure that out. You've also got to figure out what's going on with Darius Garland. And then you got to figure out, you still got Evan Mobley, who can sign that contract extension, who I'm sure is going to the rookie scale deal, where he's going to get a max deal, or as much as he can get. And then, you've got Isaac Okoro, who's a restricted free agent. What do you do with that? I think that's not a huge priority for the Cavs, but they've got to figure that out. Do we want Isaac Okoro back? And if not, how are we going to replace him? So I think there's a lot of they got to take care of business in-house before they can even worry about, how are we going to fill out the bench? And that's all they'll be doing, really, is filling out the bench if they do turn towards free agents.
Sam Amico, hoopswire.com, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. I'm sure we will be bugging you after the first round of the draft coming up a little bit later this week. Thanks, Sam.
All right, thanks a lot for having me. We'll talk to you soon, Dave.
Sam Amico, hoopswire.com. Make sure to check him out. Great stuff. All of the NBA in addition to the Cavs as well. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We turn our attention to the Browns. Coming up, it is Tim Bielik from cleveland.com and the Plain Dealer talking Browns on Sports4CLE. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We turn our attention to the Cleveland Browns as Sports4CLE continues. This one from the Bleacher Report. Every team's most important contract extension ahead of the 2024 season. The Bleacher Report says for the Browns, it's Amari Cooper as the wideout market continues to evolve as superstars put pen to paper. Locking up Cooper for the long haul will also provide Barry with much cap-needed flexibility down the road. Let's welcome in Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Tim, it'll be interesting to see the number of years. I think they probably have a pretty good idea about the dollar figure, and I think the number of years is kind of where they're going back and forth.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked about before that, unlike some of the other receivers that are getting big money deals, you're looking at Amari Cooper being 30 years old. So, that's kind of maybe the sticking point of why he may not get as many years as so many other guys, obviously. And that's where this whole thing kind of comes into play. Money-wise, I don't know if it's that big of an issue, but if you're looking for no more than maybe a couple years, it'll be interesting to kind of see where this ends up. But obviously, considering the lack of proven depth the Browns have at receiver right now behind Amari Cooper, it's imperative that they find a way to get something done.
All right, let's head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hey, Dave, Frank from Cleveland. I just got one thing to ask you today. Do you think the Browns are in negotiations with the 49ers for Brandon Ayuk? Is that what's the hold-up taking so long to figure out Amari's status, and blah, blah, blah. But anyways, brother, I love you, man. You and the family be safe and stay cool. Be good, Dave. Love you, man.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. So, Tim, this was tweeted out from Adam Schefter. Disgruntled wide receiver Brandon Ayuk and the 49ers meeting today, and that's from Ryan Clark, who former player with the Steelers, reporting that on NFL Live. A couple of things. I don't think they're at the point where they are discussing Ayuk. Ayuk's going to want more than $30 million a year for 5 years. He's 26 years old, so he's in the contract before this one for Amari Cooper. He's in the contract negotiations that Cooper's contract is ending. I think there's a couple of things. Again, the holdup with Cooper, I don't think they can agree if it's going to be 3 years guaranteed, 4 years guaranteed. I think they have a pretty good idea of the money. It's going to be 26, 27, 28 million a year, maybe more up front than back. They'll probably put void years on it so that there's a way that the Browns can get out of it if Amari Cooper starts to look like, a 32, 33-year-old wide receiver, which he hasn't so far.
Yeah, I mean, I've said before, like I said before with Cooper, I feel like he's a guy who should age better than some other receivers just because his game isn't purely predicated on athleticism. But with the idea of Cooper and Ayuk, obviously, I can't imagine they're related to each other. Obviously, like you said, Brandon Ayuk's probably going to get more money for a longer term than Amari Cooper is because Ayuk is younger. He's 26 years old, and he's still got some ceiling left. He's just now getting into the prime of his career because he's an ascending talent. He had more yards this year than Cooper's had at any point of his entire career. So obviously, you're going to pay Brandon Ayuk more money than Amari Cooper. I think for me, it feels far less likely that the Browns make the trade for Ayuk than just bring back Cooper because with Amari Cooper, yeah, you may get diminishing returns at a certain point again because of age. But again, you have a player who probably will make less money. It'll be less term, less guaranteed money that you have to worry about. And the big thing, he's already familiar with your system. Whereas with Brandon Ayuk, he's going to have to come over, learn a new system a month before training camp, or even less, or even shorter time before then. Not to mention the pressure of suddenly being the #1 receiver in Cleveland. So there's a lot of factors that kind of play into it. If this was a trade that I think was going to happen, to me, it feels like something that would happen much earlier in the offseason than late June. I just think it seems far more likely the Browns just get something done with Amari Cooper and the Niners do the same with Brandon Ayuk.
Yeah, that would be a if everything goes south, the trade of Cooper for Ayuk is a bailout. That's the last resort probably on both sides. All right, this is players who surprised the most from each team's OTAs and minicamp. This from ESPN.com. For the Browns, it's Cedric Tillman. Absences of Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy left opportunities for many young pass catchers, and the coaches praised the growth and commitment of Tillman. Cleveland saw attentiveness in the weight room in meetings that carried over onto the field, and he's also building rapport with Deshaun Watson. Those are all things you want to hear from a guy in his second year. You expect a step up in a player's second year, and those are all the signs of a step up.
But that's why they always say the biggest jump you usually see in a player from any sport is year 1 to year 2. And with Cedric Tillman, I always thought the big thing with him is he has the physical tools. He was physically ready to kind of play in the NFL, but the difference in why he maybe didn't have as good of a rookie season, I think some people were hoping for, is just sometimes it's just attention to detail. In the NFL, in an NFL scheme, there's far more attention to detail. There's far more nuance than in your typical college scheme. And Tennessee is kind of more of a rudimentary college schemes. And that's a common thing that you see with a lot of guys is they just have to learn how to play the NFL game, the mental aspect of that, because it is a jump, not just physically, but you also have to understand how to think the game in certain ways because you have to operate in those fine margins. And I think we saw that with Tillman last year. Physically, he was ready for it, but I think just that attention to detail and route running and certain things, it needed to be sharper. And, by that account, it seems like it's gotten sharper. That now that he has an offseason to understand what he really needed to refine, that's why I think this is a good chance for him to really have a strong second season. And again, we saw flashes of that last year. I think of the Denver game when he was, Dorian Thompson-Robinson's top target before he went down with his injury. Tillman certainly got the tools to be a solid outside receiver. Now can he continue to grow as far as a route runner and the nuance, like I said, to become a guy who is not just physically imposing and doesn't just win physically, because in the NFL, everybody's great physically. It's what can you do from a mental aspect to separate yourself from everybody else.
Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer and cleveland.com and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll continue talking Browns here on Sports4CLE. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program is dedicated to recognizing exceptional students, teachers, and schools throughout Ohio. Scan the QR code on screen to nominate students and teachers as Academic All-Stars and Teachers of the Month. They must be currently enrolled or teach in grades K through 12. Is your K through 12 school developing students' literacy skills to achieve success in reading? If so, you can nominate your school for the School of the Year. Students can win $100, teachers can win $500, and schools can win $2,500. Scan the QR code, fill out the forms, and nominate deserving students, teachers, and schools today. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program takes pride in honoring exceptional students, teachers, and schools across Ohio. Submit your nomination today. It's fun, fast, and free. We continue talking Browns with Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer and cleveland.com. This is from Mike Clay, ESPN, via heavy.com. He projects Deshaun Watson to throw for 3,741 yards. That would be 7th most in Browns franchise history. 21 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. Also thinks he will run for 377 yards and 3 touchdowns. Again, that is Mike Clay from ESPN. That's via heavy.com. Tim, if Deshaun Watson throws for 3,741 yards with 21 touchdowns. Browns are going to have a pretty successful season. They're going to be in the mix in the AFC North, and they're going to be in the mix to go deep in the playoffs.
Yeah, maybe I kind of feel like the 21 touchdowns is kind of a little low to me, because you look at his numbers, you know, in his second and third seasons in Houston, 26 touchdowns apiece. And then you look at last season, 7 touchdowns in 6 games, although we can, you know, say that semantically it was 5 and a quarter games, and really he was kind of ineffective in that one quarter in Indianapolis. But then you also look at the 11 interceptions. That would put him on given the same amount as Brock Purdy had last year, Jordan Love, Matthew Stafford, and then fewer than Jalen Hurts, Tua Tagovailoa, Josh Allen, and oh, by the way, Patrick Mahomes. So if considering the Browns' issues with turning the football over last year, the interceptions they threw, I think the Browns would be very happy with only 11 interceptions from Deshaun Watson. Obviously, I'm sure they would love him to score a few more touchdowns than 21. I think if he gets in that 26 to 27 range, I think that's a very successful season, especially if, like I was saying, he can keep those turnovers down, because we saw just how much it hurt this team, particularly in the playoff loss in Houston when Joe Flacco threw those 2 pick sixes.
Yeah, I think the touchdown numbers might be in that 21, 25, 26 range, because I think the Browns are going to be able to effectively run the football with that offensive line. Dante Foreman's a really good back. When Nick Chubb gets back, I think they'll be able to run the football. And I think because of the way they're going to the way I think they will run their offense, they'll run into lighter boxes, which is even going to be more of a problem with Foreman and Nick Chubb.
Yeah, you do bring up a good point with Deontay Foreman. I suddenly had kind of visions of like Tolbert, you know, being like, remember how he was kind of the fantasy football, for lack of a better term, touchdown vulture. I don't know if that'd be the same kind of case in 2024, but that kind of goal line weapon as a running back is certainly a thing that I could see the Browns using quite a bit of, especially if with new offensive line coach Andy Dickerson employing some different run schemes and different run fits in this offense. So certainly they'll have a bunch of different ways to put the ball in the end zone potentially.
So this one's from The Athletic. What every team should be worried about entering training camp. The Browns, what will they get from Deshaun Watson? Watson set to play 2024 on a record salary cap number, $63.9 million deal. The Browns as a whole have become an older team. It's not that Watson has to be phenomenal in September, but by the back half of the season, we'll probably know if he can finally deliver big returns or if the Browns' spending might yield only mediocre results. Yeah, you know what? I think the biggest question mark in the entire NFL is probably Deshaun Watson and what he does at quarterback. And I always come back to this, and I've asked this of a number of people. I can't find a quarterback who was really good, 3 Pro Bowl years, and then barring some catastrophic injury, which Deshaun Watson hasn't had, just lost it. 3 really good years and then just couldn't play at the end. So that kind of leads me to believe he's going to get back to the caliber of quarterback that the Browns thought they were getting when they traded for him.
Yeah, and obviously you talk about, coming off a shoulder surgery. Now, granted, all the reports from minicamp say that his arm looked good. Obviously, he was throwing a couple 50-yard passes in the last day of minicamp, so the arm seems like it's in pretty good shape. I think with the Browns, obviously there's reason to expect Deshaun Watson to struggle, but then again, you look at the early part of the schedule, there is some soft landing to kind of start the season. I know the Cowboys are week 1, but they made a lot of changes on defense. They lost Dan Quinn. They lost quite a few pieces on that defense. The Jaguars, Giants, and Raiders certainly are very beatable defensively. The Commanders, they've got some interesting young pieces on defense. They can certainly create pressure for Deshaun Watson, but I think the way the schedule is certainly set up is Deshaun Watson doesn't need to be great early, like they were saying in that blurb there. He doesn't need to be great right away. He just kind of needs to get his feet under and be solid and contribute to winning football. And in a lot of ways, in the first 3 games he was playing, particularly the Titans game and in some ways the Bengals game, I know he didn't really have a great game in Cincinnati against the Bengals, granted because of the weather, but he did enough things in pretty much all the games he played, with the exception of the Colts and Steelers game. Those other 4 games, he did enough things to help the team win. And the biggest thing is, if he's struggling, he can't be a reason the team loses. He just needs to continue to stay on the field, keep himself healthy, and eventually find his rhythm. Because when he does is when the schedule gets tougher, and that's when they may need Pro Bowl Deshaun Watson to show up more than he has so far. Although considering what he just came back from the second half in Baltimore, it's about as good a sign as they could have asked for heading into his injury.
All right, this is 12 non-quarterbacks who are under the most pressure for the 2024 NFL season. From CBSSports.com, 10 they say Kevin Stefanski, which I disagree. But they say Watson cannot be fully detached from Stefanski entering year 3 of their polarizing partnership. It feels like now or never for the Browns coach to squeeze something worthwhile out of the often injured quarterback. And again, the often injured, you know, he had a non-contact ACL that ended his rookie season, and he had the shoulder surgery, the injury that ended last season. Are we calling Joe Burrow often injured? He had 2 seasons out of his 4 that ended early because of injury. Lamar Jackson has missed games. If you play quarterback in the NFL, you're going to get hurt, and those injuries are going to cause you to miss a lot of games. I wouldn't say he's often injured. Now, he does have to play well.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like you're saying, I mean, quarterbacks are going to get injured. I mean, I think I mentioned this last time I was on that, you know, you can only protect a quarterback so much because defenders are always going to get those hits on the quarterback. You can't avoid that just because of the nature of the way the game is played. Your quarterback is going to get hit and going to get hit a lot after the whistle. It's just how it works. So you can't really put that on Kevin Stefanski. Obviously, you kind of have to hope that Deshaun Watson doesn't have another one of those injuries, especially last year. You know, he had the rotator cuff strain, the high ankle sprain in Baltimore, and then, of course, the fractured glenoid in the right shoulder that caused him to miss the rest of the season. But I'm with you. I don't think there should be that much pressure on Kevin Stefanski. In fact, I think the pressure should be off of Kevin Stefanski. Again, 2-time NFL Coach of the Year. They won 11 games last season with 5 different starting quarterbacks. They beat the 49ers with PJ Walker as their starting quarterback. And they beat the Steelers with Dorian Thompson-Robinson starting at quarterback. Joe Flacco led them into a December surge that got them in the playoffs. You could argue Kevin Stefanski, they don't get that far without Kevin Stefanski, without that steady hand and that offensive creativity that allowed those quarterbacks, in spite of kind of the rotating carousel quarterbacks they had to put back there because of injury, that they don't get that far without Stefanski and his steady hand guiding the ship there.
Yeah, the other thing is if you want to, you know, I think they're blaming the Deshaun Watson trade on it. They swang big with the Deshaun Watson trade. It hasn't worked out so far. Doesn't mean that it won't, but if it doesn't, would you rather him just sat there and done nothing and said, hey, we're mediocre, but we like mediocre? That was the thing. That trade said we don't like mediocre. Mediocre isn't good enough. So I don't get why people are upset about the Deshaun Watson trade, even in retrospect.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. Tying this to hockey, funny enough, because we have Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final tonight, Wayne Gretzky famously said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So if it's better, I think, to have swung and missed, swing for the fences and miss, than to not swing at all. Because if the pitch is 90 miles an hour down the middle of the plate and you don't even swing, you have no chance to hit it. If you swing, you at least have a chance to hit it out of the ballpark. So obviously, the Browns in 2022, they felt they had to go for the swing. Obviously, unfortunately for them, it hasn't worked out to this point. Not saying it can't. It certainly still can. But think of where they would be if they didn't make that Deshaun Watson trade. Where they'd be in 2022, where they would be in 23, now into 2024. I mean, they would not be in this kind of place where we're talking that they're at least a solid Deshaun Watson season away from really contending, I think, for a Super Bowl chance.
Tim Bielik and I are going to step aside, take a quick timeout. Other side of the break, under-the-radar NFL signings that are among the best in the league. One of them is one of the Browns signings. Sports for CLE. I'll be right back. Stay with us.
Moneymaker from the Ohio Lottery has no interest in beating around the bush. Money Maker. You play the game, you could win money. Up to $2 million. With more than $88 million in prizes from $50 to $500. Moneymaker cuts right to the cash. Unlike this guy.
We continue talking Browns with Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. This is from Athlon Sports, 10 under-the-radar NFL signings in the offseason. One of them, Jameis Winston for the Browns. Joe Flacco set a high bar for the backup last season. Winston can be just as productive in Kevin Stefanski's offense. In the last full season as a full-time starter, 2019 with the Bucs, Winston threw for a league-leading 5,109 yards, league-high 30 touchdowns. He also had 30 interceptions, so we'll point that out. But at 30, Winston will be a major locker room presence in Cleveland. I think the thing they're overlooking here, Tim, is this offense is going to evolve from what Kevin Stefanski's was. And I think Jameis Winston is actually a much better fit than Joe Flacco. Flacco, it was a great story. He played well, and he turned the ball over a boatload, and they got to stop that.
Yeah, I think with Flacco, I think we even talked about it last season that when it came to Flacco, the analytic numbers behind his performance said there was a lot of regression potentially happening there. But I think with Jameis Winston, obviously, he's got the experience of having gone through a lot of tribulations as a starting quarterback in the NFL. And the last part there in particular says what I think is the biggest thing is he's such a locker room presence. You hear him talk, he's such a positive, beneficial personality. And I think something like that has got to be very good for Deshaun Watson. A guy in that quarterback room is going to just pump him up and keep him positive, keep, that energy going, keep that swagger up. And I think in some ways, if you're going to be quarterback in the NFL, that's what you need. You need to have that positive energy. You need to have that swagger. And I'm not saying that Deshaun Watson doesn't have those things, but if things get tough, you want that backup quarterback to have that ability to pump your starter up and be like, you're fine. Don't worry about it. You still got it, just in case you ever need that little extra spark. And I think that kind of is that extra little boost that can help Deshaun Watson, get back to where he was, especially because you're trying to keep that energy up and positive with him, even in the early part of the season if he has some struggles coming back from his injury.
So this is from The Athletic, AFC North 2024 preview for the Browns. Biggest question, can their defense improve in the red zone? Red zone defense was the NFL's worst, with opponents scoring touchdowns 71% of their trips into the red zone. New linebackers Jordan Hicks, Devin Bush should help, as should Quentin Jefferson and Mike Hall Jr., although Mike Hall Jr. not a run stopper. I think that's fair. I think red zone defense is a fair question, and I will be disappointed if Jim Schwartz doesn't have that playing significantly better.
I agree. And I mean, he's talked about it, throughout the offseason is how do you continue to grow, how you continue to evolve, and that's improving on your weaknesses. And when you look at the Browns defense, obviously the big one is that glaring number in the red zone. We talked before that so many football games are won and lost between the 20s. Is can you stop the other team from scoring in the red zone? Can you hold them to 3 or possibly even 0 with a 4-down stop or a takeaway instead of letting them score touchdowns? And that number 71%, that's staggering, especially when you consider just how stifling this defense was between the 20s, that they were just not letting teams gain any yards. So obviously that does need to kind of be a point of emphasis. And you would think when you get into the red zone, that's where the defense is supposed to have the advantage because the numbers are the same, but the space is so compressed. And with the Browns, they have speed all over the place. They have such a great pass rush, guys that can fly to the football. It's just something that they got to figure out, obviously. And if they get that number down, even if, the yards go down, the yard rankings go down, if they're not as stingy through the air or on the ground as they were a year ago, if they're better at keeping teams from scoring touchdowns in the red zone, this defense, I think, can still be about as good as it was a year ago.
Yeah, the other thing is year 2 in any system, you should see improvement. Year 2 in Jim Schwartz's defense, we should see some improvement. It might not be, they held teams to less yardage, but red zone defense would be an area that, if they are able to improve that significantly, that would be growth in year 2. All right, before we go to break, every NFL team's biggest secret weapon entering the 2024 season from Total Pro Sports for the Browns, they say Martin Emerson Jr. He was low-key lights out last year with 4 interceptions, 14 pass breakups, and did not allow a single TD in coverage. Allowed just a 46.8% completion percentage and opposing passer rating of 46.3 when targeted. I keep reading those 3 things, and I'm like, how did this guy not make the Pro Bowl? No
Yeah,
touchdowns, 46.8% completion, 46.3% QBR when targeted. How is that not a Pro Bowl cornerback?
I was asking the same question in the end of last season. I said he probably was Pro Bowl worthy and arguably should have gone to the Pro Bowl. And I'd also argue I don't even know if you can call him a secret weapon at this point. To me, he's been the #2 corner in this team opposite Denzel Ward for, I'd say, the last season. And he's the fact that, as a rookie, he didn't have those interceptions. Then in year two, he started getting those interceptions, picked off Brock Purdy, picked off Trevor Lawrence. You got a guy who has the physical tools to match up with those bigger receivers, and in combination with Denzel Ward, who's got the speed to match up with smaller receivers. You have a guy in Emerson who has the makings of another star corner, and to get that again as an early third-round pick is a massive steal by Andrew Berry. And it's hard to think where this defense would be without Martin Emerson, because he plays such a part in that identity of that defense that finished #1 against the pass, because like that stat showed, a 46.9 passer rating when targeted. That is absolutely remarkable, and it's so hard to do in an NFL that caters so much more to the offense, and the receiver talent right now is probably as good as it's ever been.
Tim Bielik and I are going to take one more time out, other side of the break. 5 Browns who could be on the roster bubble after minicamp and OTAs. Sports4CLE, we'll be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer and cleveland.com. This one is from the Factory of Sadness. 5 Browns on the roster bubble after mandatory minicamp last week. Number 1, they go Siaka Ika, defensive line. We'll get these all at the end then. Number 2, David Bell, wide receiver. Number 3, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, quarterback. Number 4, Pierre Strong, running back. And number 5 on the list, they say Cade York, kicker. Tim, I don't think they might be on the roster bubble. The only one I don't think is going to be on the 53 is Cade York, and he never was intended to be. They signed him as the guy on the practice squad, the young developmental kicker with Dustin Hopkins. But Ika and Bell are third-round picks. Andrew Berry and the Browns give every benefit of the doubt to draft picks. Pierre Strong they traded for, and I just don't see them getting rid of him. And Dorian Thompson-Robinson was drafted to be a developmental quarterback, and they had to throw him in probably 2 years before they really were hoping he would take significant snaps.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at that list, I do agree that York is probably the one that's most likely not to make the roster. I mean, he's kind of essentially, for lack of a better term, maybe a camp leg. Well, with Dustin Hopkins, he's entrenched as your starter. Dustin Hopkins can be the kicker next year unless he has a significant injury. But then you look at the rest of the list, David Bell, I don't think he's going anywhere. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, I don't think he's going anywhere. Bell, I think, showed enough in clutch situations, particularly the one that's always going to stick out on my mind is that 4th down against the Jaguars. Granted, he got wide open with a coverage bust, but you still got to catch the pass, and you still got to score the touchdown on that 4th down. You think about how important that play was in that game, especially such a tight game against a Jaguars team that was still playing well before they had that late season collapse. I think Bell's done enough, even with the additions of Jerry Jeudy. With the addition of Jerry Jeudy in particular, Jamari Thrash, Cedric Tillman's second season. I don't know if David Bell goes anywhere. DTR, same thing. Obviously bringing in Tyler Huntley and Jameis Winston. I think, you keep DTR around because like you said, he wasn't supposed to play last year. You could argue he wasn't even supposed to play this year, and then he was forced to play more than he was supposed to. But I think when I look at this list, obviously the one who's got to step up the most for me, the one who's in the most trouble, I think is Siaki Ika. I think he obviously played very little last season. I was concerned, maybe he's a little one-dimensional, and he really struggled to get on the field. Although, granted, I think a large part of that was due to the veterans that were in front of him on the team. And then this offseason, they went ahead and added Quinn Jefferson, and they used their first pick in the draft, 54th overall, on Mike Hall Jr., who's a younger defensive tackle who has a higher upside and more pass rush ability to be out there on third downs. I'm not saying Siaki Ika is going to be a 1-year and done guy for the Browns, but I think he's got a little work to do to make sure he keeps his spot.
Yeah, and I do think they will give him every opportunity. The other thing that I'm interested to see, David Bell is the type of wide receiver that in those choice route situations that we've heard they're going to use a lot, that's tailor-made for him. That's a guy that is really good at kind of seeing what the quarterback sees and getting to a soft spot. And those are guys that usually find a way to stay on the roster as the 5th, 6th, 7th wide receiver that carves out a niche because you can put him in a tough spot and he finds a way to make plays.
Yeah, he just seemed like he had a knack for just finding space on big plays. I mentioned that 4th down against the Jags. He had that big 4th down catch also in the comeback win against the Niners. Just a knack for making the plays that he's needed to make. So I think there's something to be said about that. And we'll see how he and honestly, not just him, but all the rest of the receivers really adjust and develop and work into this choice route system that Ken Dorsey's brought in.
All right, let's take a look at this. This is from the Bleach Report. Veteran free agent contracts the Browns must consider. They go edge rusher Carl Lawson, 28-year-old, barely saw the field for the Jets in 2023, was dumped early this offseason. 2 years ago, started all 17 games, had 7 sacks, 20 QB pressures. Cornerback Adoree Jackson. Browns have a history of enduring injury at quarterback. Playoff hopefuls can never have too many cornerbacks, especially in depth. Could add value with a special teams experience. Offensive tackle Donovan Smith is not an elite left tackle at this stage in his career. However, he has started and won Super Bowls for both Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes. Starting caliber tackles usually don't come at a bargain. Smith played on a modest 1-year, $3 million deal last year. I don't think there's any way they go out and get an edge rusher and cornerback. How many of them do you think they can have? I mean, they might have the deepest cornerback, and they like the 7th. They got a steal with the 7th round pick in Miles Harden. That one I don't see. If you can get Donovan Smith on a 1-year, $3 million deal, they might do something like that. But I don't see any of these guys being on their radar, really.
Yeah, I think of the 3 guys, Smith would make the most sense to me, even just looking at the depth chart. I mean, we've talked so much about how we don't even know who's going to start at offensive tackle for the Browns. They got 3 starters for 2 spots. But with Donovan Smith, certainly I think, he could slot in as a backup because all 3 of these guys are coming off season-ending injuries. So maybe a nice insurance policy would be the smart way to go. But, looking at edge rusher, if you throw Isaiah McGuire in there, they're 5 deep at that position as far as guys you could rotate in. And Jim Schwartz maybe puts, up to those 4 guys out there at a time. He obviously got Zadarius Smith and Myles Garrett back. Obo Okoronkwo played really well last season, and Alex Roy took a massive leap. I thought at the end of his 2nd season really started to show, I think, the promise that he was about. In corner, I mean, it was already extremely deep to begin with. We talked about the big 3 guys, and he had Cameron Mitchell into his 2nd season. Miles Harden, you just talked about. Again, there's only 53 roster spots available. They haven't expanded the rosters past 53. Who knows if that's going to happen if we get to an 18-game schedule, excuse me. So there's just no room right now at defensive end and corner to add another guy. I get the idea of making sure you want to add veterans, but there's only so many spots available for certain guys. And if you're going to make a move of those 3, I would go for Donovan Smith just to give yourself an insurance policy at tackle, just in case, in case Jedrick Wills or Jack Conklin or DeJuan Jones, in case one of them isn't quite 100% to go start the season. So you can't have too many good offensive linemen. So that would be my choice of the 3. But I'm kind of with you. I don't know if any of those 3 seem that likely.
Before I let you go, when you look at this roster, what areas do you think need to be upgraded, and when do you think they get upgraded?
It's kind of hard to say. I mean, if there's a position that I think still seems weak, it's tight end, and we kind of talked about it right now because outside of David Njoku and Jordan Akins, there's not really a lot there. I know the signed Giovanni Ricci, who seems to me kind of an H-back type, Zaire Mitchell-Payton, a former UDFA from a year ago. And it's the tricky part is there's not a lot of guys that could be available to kind of fill that gap. But then again, when you look at if you're considering third tight end a week is if that's a weakness, if that's arguably your biggest weakness, then you're in good shape because again, you look around the depth chart, so many spots are filled, so much of the two deep is kind of taken care of. We talked about defensive tackle that they have 4 solid veterans in there, and then you throw in Mike Hall Jr., who could certainly rotate in pass rush situations. That I think makes that very deep. Linebacker would be the only other one I would consider, although based on, the reports from minicamp that 6th-round pick Nathaniel Watson seems like he caught on pretty quickly that he could find a role. I mean, it's just like I said, it's just a roster that doesn't have a lot of spots. And I think if you're really concerned about the biggest concern you have is about a third tight end, you're probably doing pretty good for yourself in the NFL.
Without question. Tim Bielik, is always great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Tim.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Have a good day.
Tim Bielik, make sure you check him out. Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Always really good stuff, NFL as well as Browns information. It's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.